We have a lot of assumptions that being mentally ill means you're not able to be a high performer, which is not true. Most people work among us and we don't have any idea that they're struggling at home. Like, we do not know what they mask away, to keep up performance and to keep up, their face, basically. So I think to understand that there's still a lot of myths that we have to dispel, basically, debunk, and to understand that these behaviors do not necessarily impact performance is really, really important to allow for those conversations to happen as well.
Hello and welcome to Inside Deutschland, your guide to careers in Germany, Season 2. This podcast provides you with insight into working in Germany and tips on how to navigate opportunities and challenges across the German labor market. I'm your host, Jessica Schuler, a Germany-focused career coach, trainer, and international educator. As part of the Inside Deutschland podcast, I interview people from all over the globe who've been successful in Germany and who have interesting insights and expertise on what working in Germany is actually like, so you can learn from their experience. Starting over in a new country and working in a new job within a different cultural setting can be overwhelming, stressful, and frustrating. It's therefore crucial to be aware of your mental health. Companies should be mindful of this as well. The well-being of employees significantly contributes to a productive work culture. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, there has also been a greater awareness of this issue in Germany. However, stigmas still persist. We will discuss these shortly and provide some professional tips throughout this episode on how to address mental health challenges related to the workplace in Germany. For today's show, I invited two experts to talk about mental well-being and mental health at work in Germany. Katharina Stolz is a life coach and a Gestalt therapist who specializes in international professionals. She talks about mental health challenges for internationals and shares some insightful tips on how to deal with them. But before we get to that, I will interview mental health advocate Nora Dietrich for a broader perspective. Nora Dietrich is a psychologist and licensed psychological psychotherapist in behavioral therapy with 8 years of therapeutic experience in inpatient and outpatient care. She works as an organizational designer, speaker, and strategic consultant with a focus on mental health in the workplace for managers, founders, and teams, advising organizations strategically and on the implementation of new work. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Inside Deutschland. And could you maybe start by introducing yourself?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Nora Dietrich. I am a CBT psychotherapist by training, but I think a mental health ambassador by heart. I do work with organizations today to talk about mental health, to talk about the space between people, everything that makes life complicated and beautifully complex, I would say. And I used to live in the US as well for a while, and my partner is also an international living in Germany. So I hope I can look at all the questions from both sides, the private side and the professional side today.
What extent do you think the topic of mental health is already playing in the workplace across the German employer landscape?
I think it's definitely growing. We know that roughly, I think it's 26% of organizations do something preventively. So, for example, offering trainings, having apps, doing mental health screenings, like something that basically pours into health before it's gone, which is a small number, but it's a growing number. Most organizations do have something for returning to work after a long sick leave, just because also it's part of the law system that we need to support people in coming back and creating a workplace that then supports them in staying healthy or maintaining their health. But I feel currently we are just in the starting phases. We offer maybe little initiatives like a mental health day, like an app, but we don't look at it holistically yet. We just trying to put in these little lights of health, but it's not thought through as a strategic plan that touches every part of the employee experience. And I think this is the future that we're trying to drive. COVID definitely helped because I think throughout COVID, we all sat in the same boat for the first time. We all were anxious. We all were worried. We didn't know how life will look like. We felt isolated. We maybe felt stressed and pressured. And COVID really supported us in understanding, okay, it is a topic. Of course, we bring our whole selves to work, including our mental health or the lack of it. So how can we maybe support that then? If we want the best out of our people, we need to put the best into our people. One part that will be growing, hopefully, is to understand mental health as a skill. So mental health is not just something that we have or we don't have. We're healthy or sick, but it's something that we can train and learn and build over time. So what I see is that more and more leaders will be trained as mental health ambassadors, mental health first aiders, whatever you want to call it, but they have knowledge about it, the awareness about it, and they know, what does healthy leadership look like? How can I, create a team culture in which we are not just have the psychological safety to share openly how we actually are doing and what potential hurdles we are facing, but also where we have the skills to then cope with that and to support and maybe, take challenges out of their way and speak up for them, in front of the organization. I think this is a main skill that I train more and more. And I think this is a super important intersection because leaders, they're not only representing the team, but they're also representing the organization. Yeah. So I think this is a big part is mental health as a skill. And the other part is to really understand as an organization and to look ourselves into the mirror very critically. It's like, where do we gain something from people behaving unhealthy at work? Where are we part of the problem? Because usually when people overwork and they don't have boundaries, and they work harder and harder and harder, they have a high tendency of perfectionism. This is great for us, to be honest. It plays into our cards and into our goals because we need, a lot of performance and effort to basically meet our targets. But we have to look at the downside of that. What is the shadow? And is that who we want to be as a company culture? Is that what we want to stand for? And I hope that this is the conversation that we have a little bit more, that we really dare to go into the structures, the systems, and into our part of the problem.
I love that it revolves around, to a certain extent, the self-reflection of like, how am I benefiting from someone else's unhealthy behaviors that are detrimental to them, right? And I want to touch on one of the elements that you mentioned, which is psychological safety. I feel like that topic and that concept can sometimes be cushioned really nicely into a conversation around productivity in the workplace, right? Where people are feeling unsafe to talk about where their boundaries are at and how they maybe can't give 100% right now because they have 3 children under the age of 5 at home or whatever it may be, and not being able to actually articulate that to their supervisors because there isn't realm for psychological safety within their relationship. When you see that in workplaces, what does that look like? And what advice do you give people who are dealing with that dynamic?
I think, first of all, we have to understand that it makes total sense to not open up about these issues. If we don't feel safe enough, it can literally hamper our career. It can change how our leader sees us. It happens all the time. The numbers are varying, but at least 1 in 10 really faces discrimination when they open up about challenges that they have. The result is more than 60% of all employees have never said anything about their mental health. We literally stay on the surface level of, hey, how are you? Fine, thanks. And then we move on and jump into the agenda points. So we miss a lot of interpersonal potential of getting closer, of being of support, of building that trust that we so much need, not only for, the sense of self at work or the sense of relationship at work, but also for innovation. Because if we don't share vulnerable things about ourselves, we usually also don't share other vulnerable pieces of ourselves. And for example, giving critical feedback is very vulnerable. Giving or sharing ideas when they are in their early stages, they're the first shitty draft stage, is very vulnerable. Maybe challenging the status quo or pointing out that there's unethical behavior in the team is very vulnerable because I open myself up to be attacked, to be put down, to not be listened to. So if that is the case, we do not only lose potential on the person-to-person front, but also on the person-to-productivity front, which is what organizations want. So I feel like what helps is, first of all, for the person that doesn't feel safe to ask, okay, what are the behaviors that make me actually feel unsafe? Like, can I point it out what it is? Because often it's just like a diffuse feeling, but it really helps to say, yeah, it's because my leader in every meeting, he asks questions, but in the end, he's going with his decision anyways. Or, if I say I cannot do no more, they just say, hey, keep your head up high, and I feel like they're not really listening. So what are these little cues, these little behaviors that make me feel unsafe? And can I point them out? Can I write them down? And you can do that as a team as well. Like, really just write down what are situations where we felt really safe and like open to share, and what were situations where that wasn't the case and why? Because this gives us our own little inner map of psychological safety, away from the big definition and the assessments that are great to do as well. But like, really, what does it mean for us? And as a leader, I have to ask myself the same, like, how much do I share about myself? Do I share what went wrong, or where I'm insecure, where I don't have the answer? Or am I pretending, that I'm always charismatic and knowledgeable and I won't fail? Then this is not really a role model that we look up to say, okay, I feel safe to do the same. So I think it has a lot, again, to do with self-reflection and with the common understanding that we want to work on it together. So what can each person bring in to make the whole team feel safer? And I think what also often happens is that we think psychological safety means harmony, but the most psychological safe teams, they actually go into conflict. But it's not an interpersonal conflict, it's usually a creative conflict, So we're not fighting with each other, we're fighting for something. But that can still feel quite tense, and uncomfortable. So to understand, safety doesn't mean comfort. It means, like being able to take risks, changes how we approach that topic. And yeah, there's just so much you can do, like little things you can do. But I feel the first part is always to understand, where do we have it and where do we not? And is it created equal? Because a lot of people in a team can feel safe and there's still one among them that isn't. Maybe based on background, maybe based on like being a minority, maybe based on whatever it might be. But like, to understand that just because I feel safe doesn't mean everyone does.
Right. Well, and these identities can also compound, right? So if you're already feeling unsafe because of some other minority status that you have, and then you're considering bringing into the fact that maybe you're dealing with some mental health issues, whether those are acute or chronic at this point in time, and that's impacting your work, you're probably going to not feel safe doing that because, as you mentioned, your career might be at stake, right? Or it can feel like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, when we think about workplaces in Germany, there's been really good strides that have been made within the last, I would say, for example, the last 10 years, also with the COVID dynamic. But where do you see there still being a lack of awareness for mental health and well-being, particularly among supervisors?
I think there's just a lot of fear. There's a lot of not knowing. So I think talking about wellness is one thing, right? But talking about mental illness is another. And I feel currently in the conversation, we talk about mental health, but we do not talk about what it means to live with a depression, to have anxiety disorder, to have a panic attack at work, to struggle with eating, to whatever, like have a substance abuse disorder. Like, there's not real chat about that. So there's a lack of awareness what that means, how that can show up at work, if it even shows up at work. We have a lot of assumptions that being mentally ill means you're not able to be a high performer, which is not true. Most people work among us and we don't have any idea that they're struggling at home. Like, we do not know what they mask away, to keep up performance and to keep up, like their face basically. So I think to understand that there's still a lot of myth that we have to dispel, basically debunk, and to understand that these behaviors do not necessarily impact performance is really, really important to allow for those conversations to happen as well. I think we see that so often, someone is ill, like might be gone for 6 weeks, 3 months because of a burnout, and nobody reaches out. We don't know what to say. We're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So we rather keep silent. And the person at home just sits there thinking, oh, I might not be valuable anything if I don't function. If I cannot provide and work hard, then I'm apparently not worth anything to the team. And we would never do that. If you were in hospital for 6 weeks, I would come by, I would send a card or flowers or send you a funny meme, to make you feel part of a team. But when it comes to mental illness, we do not really do that. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of like walking on eggshells. And I think this just needs more awareness and more information to say mental illness is just part of the human experience, in a team of 10, there's probably at least 2 people currently facing something. So let's talk about it.
What are some ways in which employees can help to destigmatize mental health issues or mental well-being issues on their team?
I think you can always use a personal example, right? That's the most powerful tool we have. And there's a lot of research about what builds trust, or the definitions of trust in research. 22 of them. And there's only one thing they all have in common, which is vulnerability. Vulnerability is the main driver of building trust. But right now we're in this stance, like we want to trust someone, but to trust them, we need them to be vulnerable. But to be vulnerable, we need to trust first because they could use that against us. So, we're in this hen or egg kind of problem and nobody starts. So to say, you don't have to share your deepest trauma, please don't, like don't share everything about you, but little glimpses of what's happening for you. Like even just a sentence like, oh, tonight I literally couldn't sleep. My heart was just racing, thinking about the project. I don't know. How do you feel about this? It's like a little way of saying, I do not have my shit together all the time. Like I'm scared sometimes. I'm nervous. I don't know how to do this. Or I'm just tired. I'm exhausted. Like little things that build trust, because I feel vulnerability is what invites vulnerability. If we go in first, people can follow. And in the beginning, of course, we have to filter how much we share. It doesn't have to be deeply personal, but it can be still something that people can, like that makes us more palpable as human beings, stepping out of our role. So I think it's asking, but it's also reacting. So I love the idea of Bits for Connection by the Gottmans. I don't know if you know them, but they did a lot of research for couples and they were following them in the lab and tried to determine what keeps them together and what increases the chances of them getting a divorce. And one of the main drivers is how often couples or partners react to the bits of connection of the other. Bits of connection at work can be something like your colleague comes in after a meeting and just falls into their chair sighing. And now you can react to that. You can say, hey, is everything okay? You want to grab a coffee, like take a deep breath, whatever. Or you ignore it and keep on writing your email. Like it's sometimes these very small moments that build the base to have bigger conversations later on, but to say, I care about you. I see you, I react towards whatever you need right now and be of support. And I think these are just tiny little things that do not have anything to do with big ambassadorship yet, but they're creating this human to human connection to say you're not alone in this.
When we think about the differences between international colleagues and not international colleagues in the German workplace, what aspects do we need to consider that might be different?
So I feel like this is just something that we do not talk enough about at work. What are the challenges that people bring? And depending on where they're from, what was the way to get here? A lot of people, especially from countries where there might be war, they might have fled due to economical reasons or family crises, like they come with a lot of trauma. And now they're here and they have to blend into a system and adapt. And to see that as one of the most courageous steps that you can take is something I think we need to be more humble about. So I sometimes have that in teams that are mainly German and then have maybe 1 or 2 people that do not speak perfect German or have a heavy accent on their English, and they're kind of annoyed because things are slower or it's harder to understand them. And for me, to have an accent on a language means you dared to leave your home and to learn a new language. Have you ever done that?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like to really have that humility would change a lot. Yeah. And I think what we can do as organizations is to support with the structural side of things. How do you do your taxes? What are the insurance that you should be getting? What are your rights as an employee? Because they're much higher and better maybe than in some other countries. So really know what you can access and how to access it is something that we sometimes need help with. And I think companies could support not only with maybe the reintegration, but also then with the settling in a different country.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you recommend to international employees in Germany who are maybe struggling actively with mental health problems and perhaps it's due to their experience at work? How would you recommend they go about that situation?
Again, that depends on the environment. The dream is that you can speak to a colleague first. Most people speak to colleagues first, just to see, do they feel the same? Is like my perception, what they perceive as well? or to just open up. And maybe get the support to then address the leader, because the leader has the most power basically to change things. But a lot of people don't feel safe. I think it's only 14% that talk to the leaders because there's a lack of awareness or skill. What you can always do is anonymously or openly address HR, people in culture, whoever works there, because they have a very good overview about your rights, but also about the resources that the company offers, and can be a coach, a support to figure out what to do next. Am I opening it up in front of my leader? Am I not? Am I just, using, for example, the employee assistance program where I don't need to speak to anybody? I don't need to open up about this, but I still receive help. They can support you in finding the right resources. I think that is always a good way to do so. Another factor is what I see is that a lot of companies offer, for example, an employee assistance program, and they usually also offer care in different languages, because I would always recommend to do therapy in your mother tongue if you can, just because emotionally speaking, it's a very different experience because you don't need to even unconsciously translate anything and lose the emotional depth of what you're going through. I think that is very important. But we know silence is suffering. And talking about it really, really helps. And if you don't feel safe to talk to anyone at work, then first share it in your friends group, in your home, or try to find external support through platforms. For example, there's great platforms online as well that offer also therapy in English to get a feel of what to do next. Yeah. And if it's a really toxic situation, then I think one should always talk to an employer, lawyer. Is that a word?
Yes, it is.
Arbeitsrechtler. Yeah, because you can be protected by law as well. It really depends on the situation. It's very broad now, but yeah, these are the steps I would take.
Excellent. Nora, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your insights with our audience.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. Thank you. We just heard a lot of interesting insights about how German companies handle or should handle mental health and well-being as a part of their work culture. In our next interview, we will discuss mental health issues that can arise specifically for international professionals working in Germany. We'll be speaking with someone who has experienced these issues and challenges firsthand. Katharina Stolz, who is originally from Sweden and now lives in Berlin, has moved countries twice and undergone a major career transition. So she knows what it feels like to be lost in your career and to have to start from scratch in a new country. Katharina, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.
We're going to be talking about a really important topic today, mental well-being at work in Germany. But I'm wondering, and I think it's important for you to first introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to do this work.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Sweden, and now I live in Berlin, Germany, and I work as a holistic life coach, and I specialize in expat challenges and life transitions. And I'm also a psychotherapist and specialized in the Gestalt method. And yeah, how did I become to do this work, right? That was the question, how it all started. Yeah, I had a profession before. I used to work in film when I lived in Sweden, and then I worked as a photojournalist living in Poland. So I moved to Poland first time. And after coming to Germany in 2007, after reaching burnout in my work as a photojournalist, I was forced to really rethink my priorities and see what was, the work that really made me fulfilled, because I could see looking back when I took some time for introspection that I had actually chosen a profession that rather was not out of passion, but rather something that, all my friends were doing. I had, chosen a path that was rather, I wanted to be special. I wanted to have validation from society, from my parents. And reaching burnout, I was really forced to rethink and look back and see what is it that I actually would like to do with my life. So that was the way that led me to coaching and psychotherapy.
You have gone through the crazy situations that so many internationals and expats go through, and then also made those decisions that are seen by others as crazy in order to get out of those not so healthy situations, right? So you've been there, done that, and now you're helping people who may be going through similar things as well. Are there common challenges that you're seeing over and over again, or is you're also seeing a variety?
Yeah, the common challenges, I would say, almost every client that come to me, they use the similar words when they come to see me at the start. And that is usually overwhelm, frustration, stress, anxiety, and also loneliness. And lack of direction, because we're talking about people that travel, right? Travel, and they're curious about the world, and they kind of go from one place to another. Usually it's not the first country they're living in, and they kind of lack a sense of direction. They feel that they need a compass. They feel a little bit lost. Those are the terms that I use when they come to me. And then of course, when we start working together and we look at, what's behind stress, right? Because stress is a term, right? And then we need to look at what is it that actually making you so stressed. And of course, living abroad involves a lot of challenges, not always only language-wise, right? It's the culture that is different. You don't have the support. You don't have your childhood friend around the corner, right? You can take a walk with. And also, a lot of clients struggle, for example, let's say they come for the job and the job is tied to a visa situation, for example. So they feel, that they need to stay in the job because of the visa. So there are so many different kind of situations that you wouldn't have if you would live in your home country.
I love this idea of a compass, right? Because I can definitely relate to, okay, I'm doing all these things, I'm moving to all these places, but like, where is this actually heading, right? What am I doing? What do you recommend to your clients who come to you and they're like, okay, I've got a loss of direction. I don't really know where this is leading to. Maybe I have all the things. I've got the relationship, I've got the job, whatever, but I'm still frustrated, I'm still stressed, etc.
Yeah. So I can just give an example from today. What I recommend is, like, what I see is that we so often look outside of ourselves for solutions, right? We think maybe that moving countries, changing jobs, changing partner will help us when we are feeling a certain way, right? When we're stressed or unhappy, we think that we need to change the circumstances that we're in, right? Or change, like, I can't work with that boss, I have terrible colleagues, the toxic environment. And sure, all of that can be true, right? But it all depends how we relate to it. So my recommendation, or I actually don't really recommend, usually I ask questions to my clients to make them look a little bit more within. What is it within them, right? What is it within them that they always want to maybe change places or change partner, or they're never happy with the place they're living in, or, complaining about the environment. So I always try to change direction from pointing the finger outside to pointing the finger to themselves and having a look a little bit more within themselves. So I challenge them to slow down, which is a huge challenge with my clients that are super ambitious, busy, high-functional individuals that have climbed the corporate ladder and jumped from one job to another. And then I challenge them to slow down, and they think I'm nuts. Right? I don't have the time. I don't have the time.
I just need to figure it out.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, jumping from country to country or moving, between different partners or whatever it may be is oftentimes a coping strategy for dealing with something internal. And, moving abroad it's super exciting. It's a joy, but it's also really difficult all at the same time, right? It's this big kind of squirmish, exciting mess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
At what point would you recommend someone does seek professional help, though? Is this something that, for example, people should even just sign up for before they even move because they know that there's going to be challenges? Or is there a certain, phase or point in time when someone kind of sees signs that they should reach out for help?
Yeah. And there is a difference with coaching and therapy because you can always go and see a coach. Always. You don't have to have big challenges to see a coach. It's always good to have a coach. And when it comes to therapy, I would also say, you don't have to be mentally ill, right, to go to therapy. That's what a lot of people think. And that's not true. You only need to be really curious about yourself and understanding yourself better and your behavior to see therapy. But of course, if you see signs of, exhaustion, numbness, I would say when you start to feel numb, you don't really feel anymore, you feel lack of motivation, really tired, and you start to have physical symptoms like headaches, belly aches, and you just feel it doesn't pass, that's definitely a time to start looking into what that is an expression for, right? Because all the physical symptoms we have, if we constantly run to the doctor and try to take painkillers, because we have headaches or migraines or bellyache. Usually that is an expression for something. And that is really difficult to understand by ourselves. So yeah, that's definitely a time when you should seek out help and to see a coach or a therapist.
One of the conditions where you really see the mental health turn into physical health problems is burnout, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the signs that are typical of burnout?
Typical signs of burnout is like somebody feeling a little bit helpless. They also have a lot of self-doubt. They kind of lack, motivation. They also have headaches, stomach aches, being very tired and a little bit disconnected from the world and not really having that energy to work anymore. You see that a lot in the workspace, right? Somebody's just like overwhelmed and it's just too much and start to isolate. Maybe in the evenings don't really go out that much. And that is definitely time to look at, how you can change your situation.
And when someone is ready to reach out and access therapy in Germany, what are some of the first steps that they need to do in order to get access to a therapist?
First step is always to go to your Hausarzt, difficult word, and you tell your doctor about your condition, and normally they would give you a prescription, and then you can go to you call your insurance company, and they will give you a list of therapists that you can contact. And the problem is that there are very long waiting lists. So that is a huge problem in Germany because then you put yourself on different waiting lists and you never know when a therapist would get back to you. And of course, when you're in that state, the last thing you want is to be on a waiting list. You just want to have help right now. So you can also seek help privately, and then you go, there are a couple of web pages that you can go and seek for international, also so English-speaking therapists or coaches in Germany. But then you have to pay yourself.
So the psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists are covered under health insurance, but coaches are not.
Exactly, but not all psychotherapists. For example, the method that I offer, Gestalt method, is not covered. So all clients that come to me, they pay. Mm-hmm. They don't go through the insurance.
Okay.
Which is also a benefit in some ways. I mean, like a lot of people say, okay, how is that done? But the benefit is actually when somebody pay themselves, they are more motivated to get better.
And they're not as limited, right, in how many sessions that they can do.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So overall, what advice would you give to internationals who are either moving to Germany or already here regarding mental health, well-being, and how that also relates to workplace integration?
Always get help before you need it. And of course, difficult to say exactly why. How do I know? But definitely start to seek for help before it's acute, because that is also, it's not always, like I mentioned before, easy to get it. So I would always make sure that that you have a network. And that comes to everything, not just coaches and psychotherapists, but also, doctors in general, because it's not so easy to find support. So I would always make sure that I ask, friends, for advice, who are you seeing, for recommendations, so that, just collect names and see and make sure that, when you really need help, you have a list of names where you can go. So that's definitely my first advice. And never take no for an answer. I mean, that's been my attitude my whole life. And, even if somebody says, I know, like I have some clients, they write to me and I don't have room for somebody at the moment. If that person writes me again and a third time and they kind of really want to come and see me, I listen, and I might think of them, before I think about somebody else, because I feel like they really made an effort. So I think that it's also important to think just because somebody says no one time, maybe there is a possibility.
Well, and that's also just really important for navigating the healthcare system in Germany too, is like being able to ask people, okay, what physical therapist should I go to? Or who is a good Hausarzt or whatever it may be, right? A lot of those choices are really, really good to bounce off of other people who've been there, done that, maybe gone through some situations that weren't so great and can tell you where you should go.
Yeah.
Katharina, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your insight and giving us input into how we can increase our mental health well-being at work in Germany.
Thank you. It was lovely being here.
In this episode, we received a lot of insight, information, and input about how we can both increase and maintain our mental health and well-being at work in Germany. From this episode, my top 3 tips are: first, if you feel safe at your workplace, you can contribute to an open work culture and create moments of connection by sharing your own little bits of vulnerable information with colleagues that you feel comfortable with. Second, it's totally normal to be stressed at work. But if you feel exhausted, depressed, numb, helpless, or have physical symptoms on a regular basis, please take action. And if possible, start by talking to a colleague or your supervisor about this to see if there's adjustments that can be made at work to help your situation. In addition, reach out to your medical doctor to get a holistic, professional perspective on your current situation. Third, access to therapy is broadly available through the German healthcare system. In Germany, therapy is, in most cases, covered by health insurance. However, there's often a long wait list, so if you want to see a therapist, you should start early with your search and get your name on those wait lists. Even if you can still manage everything, it's always better to get help sooner rather than later. We'll provide some helpful links about this in the show notes. Thank you for tuning into this episode. For more information, please make sure to check out the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and follow the show. If you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episode topics, please feel free to leave us a comment or write us via the online feedback form, which we also will link to in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Do you happen to have a favorite saying in German related to mental health or well-being?
Mental health oder mentale Gesundheit ist kein do-it-yourself-Projekt. Mental health is not a do-it-yourself project. We need people to be a helping hand, to maybe guide us towards support or resources. We can do a lot for each other, and I think we should dare to ask for help more.
Inside Deutschland, Your Guide to Careers in Germany, is a podcast brought to you by the Alumni Portal Deutschland. I am your host, Jessica Schuler. Sound design, music, and production, Steffen Stark and Arne Bergner for Der Apparat Multimedia GmbH. Editing and production, Jessica Schuler, Amelie Berbot, Charlotte Dettich, and Leone Klüssendorf for Der Apparat Multimedia GmbH.